Hello, everyone, and welcome to Occult Explorers. I'm Snappy, and today we're going to be doing a continuation of our Arabic Legends series. And we're joined by my co-host, Dion, as well as our special guest, Wretch. So, Wretch is is a magician and an occultist, as well as an autodidactic scholar who has done a lot of comparative religious study. Has written several different books for Academia.edu as well as other places, from everything from Orphism to spiritual anarchy to Pythagoreanism to his massive volume 1, which looks at the various pagan and Gnostic antecedents to the Kabbalah and Merkaba kind of occult traditions. And yeah, so thank you for joining us today, guys.
Thanks for having me.
So, Wretch, why don't you just kind of tell us about yourself, tell us about your background and your kind of magical approach and your approach to studying these various mythologies.
Well, I'm a practicing pagan of almost 20 years now, but I have studied magic and occult traditions from around the world, and that includes the Abrahamic traditions, just because they're so interesting. I'm pretty interested in Goetia as well, as part of that volume 1, and that includes demonology and necromancy and all kinds of things. And I've been trying to trace out how these things have been related, or particularly interested in the ritual use of entheogens. And you see that all over the place. So I'm interested in understanding the practical methods of ritual entheogen use.
Right. That's incredible, right? So like earlier in our last episode, Dion, we were kind of looking at like the Arab legends and whatnot. Where did we kind of leave off there?
We were talking about magic carpets, and the concept like you see in movies like Aladdin, the flying carpet, or the genie on the carpet, and that maybe that's symbolic of entheogens. And it's maybe those dyes inside the magic carpet, the red colors could have been a host of different things, from mollusk to Syrian root to different things, as well as cannabis. We were talking about smoke, cannabis, and so they might have called it fumigation.
Right.
We were talking about not just Arabia, it's also Persia as well. Turkey, Persia, the Middle East, just the whole area there is ripe with these myths and legends.
Exactly, right. And I just keep thinking, because in our last few episodes, right, we were looking around the various areas and we're talking about all these various cults, and every single one of them has entheogens at the heart of these rites, right? So it's like ubiquitous everywhere, and we're noticing all this coded language like we were talking about in the Bible with the myrrh bearers and with the alabastron. So it's not a stretch, right, to think that they're doing the same kind of things with these magic carpets, right?
Prayer rugs, and we see it in modern culture and myth, gets even with Disney and all these movies and cartoons. It's popular right now with the kids.
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me, because before too we were kind of talking about like the shamans, right? Like this is a really common understanding. If you look at the shamans in Siberia, right, they have those myths of the flying reindeer, but it's clear we understand that these are people who are tripping on the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, right? So it's like, so Wretch, what I want to know is like, what do you think is going on with the all of this fumigation? What are they actually doing with these magic carpets? Like what? And what do the earlier traditions kind of say? Like,
Well, I mean, we have some pretty clear examples of magic carpets in a few different ritual contexts. It has multiple uses. Most simply, you can use it as a portable magic circle, so that you don't have to draw it out each time, and you can bring it out into nature and just unfurl it. But
you're right. That kind of seems how it's used in the Islamic tradition for the Islamic prayer, right? As a rituals cleansed space.
There's that for yeah, and but it can also be used as a tent for hotboxing or fumigation. And but it might also be used, in Egypt as one of the most where Westerners first learned of magic carpet probably was from the book Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights. And there it's a bit ambiguous. It seems to fly, but it also is more like teleportation is actually the way it's described. Not in if you actually read the original book by or translated by Richard Burton, he includes all of the drug references to hashish and stuff. Not so much in connection to the magic carpet, but there are also, once you know what to look for, there's subtle allusions to what's going on in the ritual context, and that Arabian Nights actually fits the Solomonic grimoires where we find this, where it's actually described more like teleportation than flying through the air. And
yeah, okay. So I wanted to ask you a bit about this because, like, we do see this stuff where they're describing that they're moving vast distances, right? Like, I think of, like, with King Solomon, we see him where he's where he has that massive green silk carpet, and he takes his entire retinue, which is like thousands of people, right?
Yeah, that's in the Quran. So that's definitely a key part of where the magic carpet's legends are coming from. He's flying around. That green carpet is under his throne, though, and it actually this is a reoccurring.
This is another thing with the myths of King Solomon, right? He always has these magical items. He has his magic throne, right? He has his magic scepter, and he has his magic ring, which commands the jinn, and then now the magic carpet.
Yeah, these are all related, and it suggests, well, the throne at least suggests a kind of Merkabah throne mysticism. There are some differences from the Jewish Hekaloth literature, but we're talking about heavenly thrones of God, or the heavens depicted as a throne themselves, like with the step layers of a dais, which represents the cosmology. And there's also in the grimoires references to the throne or the angels around the throne. And that's because what I realized is that they're not teleporting really. That's just, the description is describing actually remote viewing. If we want to, give them the benefit of the doubt, it's remote viewing. And
okay, that's interesting, because we do see other traditions that do that, right? That use drugs for remote viewing or for astral projection,
Yeah, so if you can remote view, then you can also remote view the specific heavens. And so they would depict the heavens on the carpet itself, and then they could go to the specific one or meet the specific angel type that they wanted. And so it becomes more like Merkabah mysticism, though there's certainly.
So it's like a chariot kind of thing. Like, explain the Merkabah for people who don't know the Merkabah.
Merkabah refers to a flying throne, which is also likened to a chariot, or translated as a chariot. And they were often descending into the underworld, but there were some examples, or in apocalyptic literature, like the Book of Enoch or the Book of Revelation, they might go into the heavens as well. And you can see a lot of this in Gnostic texts. And I have actually found that there are some odd similarities between Gnosticism and mystical forms of Islam, or ideas about, say, the jinn. So
this really reminds me, like you were telling us earlier, Dion, about Muhammad, right? And his donkey. And doesn't him and his donkey ascend to all of these 9 heavens? That seems really reminiscent of this,
Yeah, well, I know Barak takes him, actually.
Oh, yeah, Barak.
He can't go. Barak, the donkey can't go to the very last level. Muhammad has to get off, and he walks with Allah at that last level. Even Barak can't go beyond that. He takes him up to a tree, and he goes through heavens, and it's there that he talks to the other prophets. I got a question for Wretch, is specifically the jinn, or the jinn, and the relationship to the carpets. Are you summoning the jinn when you're on the carpet? Is that what helps give it the flight powers?
It is in some cases, yeah. Like in the Grand Key of Solomon is a Islamic Solomonic grimoire, which gives detailed instructions on making a tent, but it's also described as a carpet. Now, the jinn are wind elementals, and they're not exactly demons. They're made from fire. And this is exactly how the archons are made in the Apocryphon of John, actually. Now, they are made of fire, but they are described as wind demons, or daemons, sorry, or elementals, because the angels are made of light, and they are totally subservient to Allah. They don't have free will in the way that the jinn do. So this is a key difference that we have to keep
Right.
in mind.
Yeah, the
That's
jinn always reminded me more of like the Greek daimon, right? Which are these spirits that are ambivalent, right? They can be
right.
good or bad. They have
They're,
their own free will, you know? And
they're
oftentimes they're associated with in people, they talk to people in their mind, like Socrates, right?
so they're basically can be a whole bunch of different nature spirits, and it's a lot like actually the Catholic idea of Celtic Christianity, with the fairies in the middle between the angels and the demons, according to how much they fell from heaven. And so they are neither good or bad, and they can help humanity or hurt us according to their individual characters. So they are also maybe trying to avoid damnation at the final judgment. So there's a lot there, but they help with Solomon, and in some cases, actually Iblis, who is sometimes interpreted like Satan, is himself a jinn, but that's how he is able to. That's the explanation for why he can rebel against God. Is because he's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. Explain this, because like the Iblis tradition is quite different than the Satan Lucifer figure, right? Like they're interpreting in a different way. Can you elaborate on this for us?
Yeah, well, there's a variety of different perspectives because the Quran is a little bit vague on certain specific points about this, and it's kind of like Islam is taking a bit of a middle path between the Christian idea of the fall of Satan and the Jewish idea of Satan being the servant of God, and there's disagreements according to particular Islamic group, but there's a great text called the Mother of Books found in the modern compilation, the Gnostic Bible. And it shows all kinds of syncretism. There's clear Gnostic influences there, Manichaeanism, maybe even a bit of Hermeticism. And it describes how the angels were made and cosmology, and God is surrounded by a curtain and sits on a carpet, actually. But this isn't so indicative. I mean, it doesn't explicitly talk about fumigation in the way the other texts do, but it's certainly that's how the heavens are delineated. They're separated by curtains and things, at least at the top. And so the more that the angels doubted Allah, the more they fell. And actually here, Azazel is the name of the more Satan-like figure, and Iblis is the head of the jinn, who only fell halfway. But there's a weird kind of conflation there. So there's layers of hell as well, and the deeper you go, the more deeper in denial the demons were. But they are made from like a demiurge type. They actually form the physical reality too, and the mountains and all of that, and that's how the fall of the celestial Adam is all explained in this Mother of Books. So it's pretty comprehensive and mystic and very Gnostic, but it's maybe not. It's not mainstream Islam for sure, but it's more. You're going to find all
That's
kinds of.
really interesting, though, because it reminds me a lot of these later Renaissance conceptions of demons and the demoniac that you see, right? and maybe it's coming from this kind of grimoire tradition, right? Like maybe there's a like, you know, what do you think about that?
Well, it seems like after the Christians destroyed most of the copies of the Book of Enoch, they had all these references to the Book of Enoch still, whether they're Muslims, Jews, or Christians, and they were trying to figure it out, what was in it, and trying to reconstruct it. And so there was a variety of theories about that. And the Book of Enoch is crucial to all this because it explains how after the Nephilim died, their ghosts left their bodies, and they stayed on Earth to plague humanity. They couldn't go to heaven because they were born of their hybrid creatures. So and the Watchers were their parents were couldn't go back to heaven either. So the ghosts of the Nephilim stayed on to plague humanity, and this is said very explicitly in the Book of Enoch. And then we can read in other texts like the Testament of Solomon or the Acts of Philip that the ghosts of Nephilim, they became the Solomonic demons. And Solomon uses his magic to control them.
Yeah, okay. I want to talk to you and ask you about this because, okay, from my limited understanding, right, Solomon has his magic ring, right, that he uses to bind these 72 spirits. And then with using these spirits, he's able to create the temple, right? What's going on there?
Yeah, that's mostly described in the Testament of Solomon, and they can't use iron instruments to make the temple, so they have to use the demons. Well, the demons are repelled by iron in later grimoires. They use the shamir worm to cut the stone, but the demons assemble it all. And there's a whole detailed explanation, and they have different roles in building it. And so that's all explained in the Testament of Solomon. But it influenced all kinds of things later on too, and it's probable that even the Freemasons were aware of this and were interested in their attempts to reconstruct the Temple of Solomon.
Well, you were talking about this on one of our episodes, Dion, right? Because they have that whole Hiram Abiff mythology, and isn't Hiram Abiff the architect who designs the temple?
Sure, they borrow him from Tyre, and he comes on down to help them supposedly build a holograph of the temples of Melkart down there. You know, I got another question for Rich, and it's going back to those jinn again. Is there a tradition of something to do with pots and trapping the jinn in pots, or trapping these spirits into a container?
Yeah, it's called hygromantia, and there's a medieval text that's like one of the earliest Christian forms of Solomonic magic, and it talks about trapping in water pots, and you can scry that way. But there are actually Gnostic references to this, and how when the Romans destroyed the temple, they released demons from the water pots. So the Gnostics actually were aware of the Book of Enoch and these Solomonic. They hated Solomon. Usually, they made fun of him, and they were concerned about these demons. And it's clear that the archons are these same ghosts of the Nephilim, in a way, in a different context. That's why they rape women in on the Origin of the World, or the hypostasis of the archons, is because they are these same rapist spirits, and it even mentions the magic of Solomon in the Origin of the World text. So there's a variety. When you piece it all together, each tradition has their own views, but they are referring to each other and aware of each other, or demonizing each other even, or trying to clarify the history of it all. And especially and then when the Christians destroyed the Book of Enoch, even the Catholics couldn't figure out their own history properly, or a lot of what these references meant. So the later Solomonic grimoires are trying to reconstruct a lot of this, and they're trying to contact demons in order to do it, to learn from them what's going on, because they don't know. And so there's all kinds of variations of this, though. I mean, from what I can see, it's actually rooted in Zoroastrianism, a lot of it. And there was a heavy Zoroastrian influence on Judaism. And they have a
Right,
figure
the Magi.
called Suleiman, who commands demons and helps their man they said was the king of the world, Jamshid, who is their close correspondences to Nimrod. Now, the Septuagint says that Nimrod had Nephilim blood in him, and that the giants helped to build the Temple of Solomon, which is so, the flood was supposed to kill these giants, but Yahweh, the demiurge, fumbled that one, and the giants survived. There's Jewish legends that they even Noah led a giant called King Og onto the ark in exchange for his servitude. So it's like, okay, you fucked that one up, Noah, and now that's why there's giants after the flood in the Bible. So they're trying to figure out all these inconsistencies, and one way they did that was calling up the demons and the spirits and the ghosts to do that. Now, to get back to magic carpets, Richard Burton explains that in Egypt it was just common practice to sleep on a mat or a carpet. They would roll it up during the day and then just unroll it at night to sleep on. So it's not an uncommon thing, but what they would do is they'd put, as I understand it, is from reading these grimoires and stuff, it's pretty clear that they just put protective symbols around it to protect their body when they're sleeping from succubi and incubi or any kind of harm. And but we can see a magic carpet in Zoroastrianism as well in this text called Arda Viraf. And I quoted in my Magic Carpets book because there's a whole ritual described there where the mystic it's like a Zoroastrian equivalent of an apocalyptic text where the mystic takes a tour of heaven and hell, and he takes a potion of cannabis, actually. But the carpet is designed to protect his body, specifically in this, while he's having an out-of-body experience. And so I can't help but think this must be, it certainly must be an influence on the Islamic Shiite traditions, but even the Jews take heavily influence from the Zoroastrian, and the Christians. All three of the Abrahamic religions had a direct influence from the Zoroastrians, but then also from each other indirectly. So there's a lot of intertextuality going on there. And that Arda Viraf text is very fascinating for the descriptions of heaven and hell. And you want to read these things if you're going to be practicing astral projection, so you can go to the right heaven or hell, and you know the angel names, and you can show you know what you're doing, and you belong there. And so
that's interesting too, because it also just really makes me think of like the Orphic tradition, where the Orphics have this: you're flying after death, your spirit gets released, and you need to know the right names and the right passwords to be able to get to the right heaven.
Right, and we can see this very clearly in the Gnostic texts, Pistis Sophia and the Books of Jude, or the Bruce Codex, provide their detailed maps of the heavens and the passwords you need, and even there's signs of a entheogenic ritualism there, but they use codes for the plants, so you can't always be certain about what they're taking, but it certainly sounds like they're taking entheogens. So in the Pistis Sophia, Jesus wears a robe, which is another topic unto itself, but his robe does have the names of the heavens and stuff, and it gives him power over the spirits. So like it's not inherent to him. He has to follow this ritualism himself. And this is also an idea we find in the Greek magical papyri, which has a very clear version of this Fumigation ritualism in the 8th book of Moses.
Yeah, you know what? Let's bring up what I want to do actually, Rich, is let's bring up your book here because we're starting to get into a lot of the stuff that you discuss here. So Reg actually wrote this incredible, an entire book here on magic carpets. Okay, so magic carpet, sensory deprivation, and entheogenic ceremonial magic. And you went, we can look through here, like you went through and you're checking all of these incredible sources and you're looking for all these examples. So we're just going to go down here to the part where you're actually talking about these the Greek magical papyri. So yeah, here we are, 8th book of Moses.
Yeah, so if anybody is doubting what I'm saying about hotboxing, like we get a very explicit. There's no mincing words from some of these examples. To start with, I should mention Herodotus, who talks about the Scythians hotboxing with cannabis specifically, and they're hooting and hollering with joy, and they do this at a funeral rituals actually, and they have the body in a wagon or like a chariot procession actually. So that's another kind of slight hint to Merkabah ritualism there, but because there's all kinds of flying chariots among the pagans as well. But
I also think about like Medea. We have all of these references to her doing these fumigation rituals, and then you know she brings with those rites wherever she goes with her version of the mystery. You know, so like this fumigation and inhaling these vapors that induce prophetic vision is everywhere, right?
yeah, and Herodotus says the Scythians have a superior vapor bath to us. So it shows the Greeks already had hotboxing, but they just didn't know about cannabis until the Scythians taught them. So incense or fumigation was very common, and we can see it in the Old Testament as well. So this in the PGM is called the 8th book of Moses because even though it's highly pagan and syncretic, and it's said to be written by Moses, actually it seems like the Jews were plagiarizing a pagan text, but they accuse Hermes of being a plagiarist in this very text.
Well, often too, you see that figure of Museus, who's conflated. Like there's there's a character in the Orphic text that could sometimes is Moses. You know, like it becomes a really complicated thing, right? So they could even be referring to the more Orphic version of this, right?
Yeah, well, they do actually reference Orpheus in the 8th book of Moses, so very openly, and they also reference Zoroastrianism and all kinds of things. So in the Old Testament, we have the tabernacle or tent of meeting, and Moses would hotbox with the incense to go meet with God, and
the burning bush, right?
he'd come out and his eyes were all red, and they carried this on into the Holy of Holies as well, and when they had the temple. So so Solomon again brings us back to Solomon, who built the temple, designed the Holy of Holies with this in mind, with this cubic tent or tabernacle, which is the microcosm of the heavens itself. Just like the throne is the microcosm of the heavens.
Well, within the Holy of Holies, don't they have a room, right, that's completely blacked out that they would use for these fumigations?
That is the Holy of Holies, is the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they have the altar of incense just outside of it, but it would be hotboxed. It's pretty clear. And actually, in Josephus, we get a description of the high priest and his robes and things, but it mentions he actually has a henbane seed pod on his hat. So
this is where we're getting some intense stuff, because henbane, I know the witches are using henbane for astral projection, right?
Yeah, out of body experiences. So
that's scopolamine, right? Isn't it?
Scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscine.
Jeez. Whoa.
Flying ointment.
But I want to, as author Chris Bennett has done the most work on this, he was vindicated a couple of years ago, as archaeologists have shown that in the Temple of Judah, they have done chemical testing to show in the Holy of Holies they were burning cannabis incense. So this is not theoretical. This is very definite that they were using cannabis or cannabosum.
Yeah,
And
Cannabosum, right? Cannabosum. And everyone should go read Chris Bennett. He's just getting ready to release another book on the history of cannabis. One of the best books I've ever read is his Occult History of Cannabis. It's one of the best reference guides on any plant you're ever going to find.
yeah, the book is Liber 420, and it's definitely helps to elaborate a lot of what I'm saying here. But the eighth book of Moses in the PGM here, it does talk about incense, or they might even take a potion, like in the Art of Araf, or they might put on an ointment. Any kind of ingestion you can imagine might be done in there. But the even non-psychoactive incense would be burned to help call upon specific entities, or to go to, say, a specific heaven associated with a specific planet. And the eighth book of Moses describes an initiation ritual. And then after you do the initiation, then you understand your divine self, and you can work the magic after that. So
okay. Yeah, and looking at it here, right, we're seeing that it's like they had the proper incense to Kronos. And just looking at this incense, right, it's got frankincense and myrrh and cassia, which are all entheogens, and I'm not sure what some of these other ones are, but wow.
yeah, there's codes there. It's hard to identify some of the plants. So I've read a lot about ethnopharmacology and read a lot of myths, and there's no shortage of plants which provide visions or have some magical effects, but it's often hard to identify exactly which one it is. So I knew that a lot of people were
Well, we
working
need
on
someone like Dr. Amon, right? Who's an
Yeah.
expert.
that. So
I got a question for you. You're talking about different plant substances. Was there any body fluids being used, Wretch?
not in these magic carpet texts that I can think of, not so much. But I just wanted to say that since other people are working on trying to identify the plants, my work is about trying to understand the ritual methods of how to work with them. So it doesn't matter which entheogen so much who you want to use. If you, as a modern practitioner, as long as you know the methods to use it, you can still astral project or use.
Right. No, this is something you see in a lot of these occulted manuals that people are generally aware of, is that, they would give you lists of potential plants and you can substitute, so.
Yeah. And they no doubt misidentified stuff themselves when they were trying to figure this out. So, or just
Right.
use
If
whatever
we're
they
making
have.
mistakes. Yeah.
They can't get certain plants. So Kentritis is the name of a key plant in these texts in the PGM, but we don't know what it means. Stephen Skinner has hypothesized maybe it's white hellebore, but we don't know for sure. So that's another one of these nightshade scopolamine, atropine, hyoscine plants, which is used in like witches' ointments. But
Right. And also, we remember Ammon was telling us he found in the hair of these priestesses, right? This is essential to these Greek rites as well.
oh, for sure, yeah, and the goddess Hecate is, who is the goddess of Medea, is particularly associated with them. So, so there's a lot of, and actually we can even see that there was some crossover between Hecate and Solomon on some talismans, as shown
Oh,
by
interesting.
Stephen Skinner and David Rankin in one of their source works of Solomonic magic there, or ceremonial magic. So there's all kinds of secretism going on. And that's because the Book of Enoch argues that the pagan gods are these same Solomonic demons, or they are the ghosts of the Nephilim. That's where all of the pagan gods are the ghosts of the Nephilim or the Watchers. And and Eusebius tells us this explicitly, that the ghosts of the giants are the ghosts of the human heroes and demigods of the pagans or the gods themselves. So it's the Euhemrists were using Solomonic mythology about the demons and Enoch to explain the origins of the pagan religions and to demonize all of it. So that was their so after the confusion of tongues at the Tower of Babel, that's when all of the other pagan religions happened. And we see, so the Tower of Babel is a key theme of it. And actually, Nimrod doesn't come up in the Quran in the same way, or the Tower of Babel is actually the closest correspondence is actually the Egyptian pyramid. But these Solomonic grimoires with the magic carpets or the mother of books actually reference Nimrod as a version. Well, the mother of books says he's a version of Azazel, who is the head of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, and the most rebellious entity in that text, or the most in denial. He's not rebellious exactly, but he's in denial of the truth of Allah. So that's why he's in the deepest hell. Whereas Iblis is actually depicted as a woman in parts of this, and is more associated with the jinn. Now, the Ifrits are more like the ghosts of the Nephilim. They are the restless dead. But and then there's other elemental entities like Peris, which are benevolent usually, but there can be more like succubi in certain cases, and we can read about in Arabian Nights. There's a great text called Prince Ahmed and the Peri Banu. So the name of the Peri is Banu, and she helps him to find treasure. And a lot of these magic carpets are used to find treasure, because if you can remote view, well, then you can tune yourself to find any treasure that might be hidden,
right?
Buried
It makes me think of like Joseph Smith with his scrying and stuff.
So yeah, if you're materialistic, you can find treasure with it, or but it seems to me originally that was more like alchemical gold or philosophic gold, and you astral project to the heavens and get it from the spirits as wisdom or enlightenment. And the Gnostics do talk about treasure in heaven in that way as well. And so it kind of became co-opted, I guess, by materialistic people.
Right.
And so they kind of missed the point.
But yeah, I want to read something here though that's really cool, because I was looking at your text here, and where it's just talking about the tents. So just at this line 100, it says, "And make it a tent under which you go to be initiated. Also have a cinnamon at your neck, for the deity is pleased by it and gave it power. And have also the Apollo who will help you, carved from a wood of laurel, with tripod standing beside him and Pythian serpent. Carve around the Apollo the great name in Egyptian form, and on his chest," then it gives this magical name, which I am not going to attempt, "written the same forwards and backwards, and on the back of the figure this name," another magical name, "around the Pythian serpent and the tripod. Have this too around your neck when you perform the initiation. It is helpful in everything, along with the cinnamon." So I'm reading this and immediately I'm thinking, cinnamon will suffocate you, and then you're hanging something around your neck. Is this like, are they trying to suffocate themselves? What's going on here?
Well, no, it's part of the Fumigation.
Okay.
But so you do the initiation ritual, and then you can also after that you can do all kinds of magic, and from then on you're a magician, but you still do it inside the tent in a lot of cases. And so say, for example, necromancy is one of the things listed that you can do in the 8th book of Moses. And there's a lot, or you might do scrying. And so this brings us to another use for the magic tent. So first, let me just say that the carpet is also used as hotboxing, and we can read this in the Christian Solomonic grimoire that I've included in there, the Key of Solomon, and it says it very clearly. You pull the carpet over you, and you prostrate yourself over a brazier, and you say your prayers, and you call on, and you have that's how you can enter into the trance state. Okay. And so you can do all kinds of things in the tent, which also serves to induce sensory deprivation. So when you're scrying, you don't want too much light, and the tent helps to keep out the light, as also keep the incense in, and so that you can do your chants or your prayers. And the eighth book of Moses does refer to like breathing in specific ways. So it seems like they're doing some kind of pranayama type practices, or just doing the chants or voce magica, the magic words written in hexameter sometimes, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
They would that gets your breath going and gets the pneuma going, and you get the Holy Spirit that way. So you can call up your dead spirit friends. You can use a skull bowl. I included a spell like that, Pity Skull Cup, which is also found in the PGM. And you use the bowl to scry the dead spirit, and you're going to have visions of it, or the skull might even talk to you. If you're on these nightshades, you're going to be seeing all kinds
Interesting.
of things. And the spirit will inhabit the smoke, and the smoke will move and take on the form of the spirit, or you'll see it in the water as you're scrying. So there's all kinds of different specific ways you can use it, but the tent sensory deprivation is a key part of this. And I mean, you can read about that in Eliphas Levi years later, but he goes into detailed explanation of all this. And in the pagan traditions, we read about incubation in the temple, a dark temple, and you go to sleep in the temple, and they put on the incense, and you have visions of the god in your dreams, and then the priest would help you interpret it. Well, this is like a do-it-yourself version of that to initiate yourself, and then you can do all kinds of things. So there's all kinds of variations on the specifics of it, but of which entities you want to call up, which heavens you want to go to, according to the tradition you're in. But this you see it very clearly in the Islamic texts too, which seems to be drawing on this eighth book of Moses, the Grand Key of Solomon. It's very Islamic, and then the Islamic magic helped to influence the Christian magic in a big way, the Christian Solomonic tradition of later times.
Right. I was going to ask you about this because I do, anyone who's interested in the occult, right? You search, you're going to find the Goetia or the Lesser Key of Solomon and the Megaton or whatever it's called. Now, how does this come in? And are there magic carpets in this tradition? Like,
yeah, in the Christian, I got it included in there. So there is a magic carpet, like I was saying. You pull it over the brazier, and you have the staff. You use that as a tent pole, and it's also, or a magic wand is used as a tent pole, and you have the right names and things on the carpet. So there's actually a whole ton of different examples of this. Dr. Stephen Skinner and David Rankin have a whole collection of treasure magic, and the treasure magic is often associated with a magic carpet in one way or another. And are also fairies come up repeatedly, because the fairies guard the treasure. And so you have to, or sometimes a magician knows that some other magician might be looking for his gold, so they have a demon or a spirit cloak or hide the magic. So you have to do a spell first to uncloak the other spell that the person who hid their treasure used to protect it. You have to dispel that, then you can find and dig up the gold. Otherwise the spirits will move it around, or you'll just never see it. So there's this whole magical warfare to steal each other's gold in these, and you make like a carpet out of a calf skin or parchment, or canvas would be useful, which is actually made out of cannabis. That's the same root. And so there's a variety of different versions of this according to how explicit, but there are some, most of the time it's not quite as explicit as the 8th book of Moses or that first Solomonic work that I quote there. It's the Grand Key of Solomon, or the veritable key, or that's the Islamic one, sorry, which is very explicit in how you use the incense inside the tent carpet. It calls it both a carpet and a tent, and it refers also to like teleportation in the same way that the variable key, which is a Christian one, does. Though that's also involved with a robe. You might wear the robe inside the tent. And
That's wild. Okay. So what I want to ask you though, go ahead, Dion.
One question. I'm reminded of Talitha Kum when Jesus quotes that Aramaic saying, tells the daughter to stand up, daughter arise. And it's in a sequence in the Bible where there's a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years nonstop, and she reaches out and grabs Jesus's robe, and she's healed immediately. And he feels the power drain through the robe. It's through the power of the robe.
yeah, okay, so that's in the New Testament, isn't it? Yeah, so I mean, in the Pistis Sophia, his robe is the source of his magic powers, and that is a part of. And in the Grand Key of Solomon, there's also, you wear a different color robe for according to the planetary ruler of the day. So you also have to go through an initiation for each of the 7 days, as in the 8th book of Moses. There's a whole fasting involved and prayers as part of the initiation, and then once you go through the initiation, you can command the demons or the jinn. So and that's kind of what the Pistis Sophia also involves, an initiation in the books of Jew, and then you can command the archons or the spirits, or they won't attack you when you're wearing the robe. You have to kind of disguise yourself, which is a common thing that we see when you go to the underworld or the spirit world. You need to look right, or else they'll know you're out of place, or they won't. If you don't look like a magician, they won't treat you like a magician and do what you say. So you have to you have to look the part, or you even impersonate a god, or Solomon himself. And so in the PGM, you do actually take on the form of the god and identify with the deity in some form. Not so much in the 8th book of Moses, but in other spells there. And they're combining these spells too, right? So people who are doing the 8th book of Moses would probably know other magic that they would do in the tent as well. So, especially since it's referencing so many diverse forms or traditions. So these were like templates more than religious dogmas that needed to be followed. I mean, if you're calling up demons, you want to do it properly and safely, and especially if you're working with these nightshades, you got to do it specifically. But at the same time, there was customization going on, and they were changing it up. So
For sure. I wanted to ask you about these demons in specific because, by the time we get to the Christian tradition, that's what I'm most familiar with. And I'm looking at these names, and they seem to be very reminiscent of pagan deity, pre-Christian Arab pagan deities, Canaanite deities and stuff like this. What do you think these spirits are that they're invoking? What is going on with this number of 72? And what are these spirits actually capable of doing when you're working with them?
Well, so as I said, they're the ghosts of the Nephilim, or else the Watchers themselves, and that's why they, in the lesser keys, they sometimes do have the names of pagan deities straight up, like Baal or Ammon is in there, or sometimes it's a more benign thing like a phoenix, or there's a more kind of a distorted form of the name, like Ashtoreth instead of Astarte.
Yeah, or like Beelzebub, right? Which is like Baal and then Zabul, you know?
That's the Lord of the Flies. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now sometimes the names or the forms of the demons don't seem so much like pagan gods, but they don't have to, because the demons are impersonating the gods and taking on a different form and name. As you can read in the Testament of Solomon, they appear differently when they're trying to fool people. So they're not always it's not always easy to identify which god they might be impersonating, but it tells us this straight up, as also Eusebius tells us straight up that the demons impersonate the gods, and that's where it's tied into the Euhemerus theory of the origin of pagan religions. So it's propaganda, but they also came to believe it themselves, and it seemed more like they were calling up the ghosts of their martyrs or saints or something, and they were just doing it in this form. But
Because I mean, you read things like in the Goetia, right? Like this spirit is in charge of this, and he can grant you these kinds of powers and all this stuff. Are people invoking these? Like, what's going on within this tradition and whatnot? And
well, so it's a form of necromancy because they're calling up the ghosts of the Nephilim, right? It would technically be then, and Goetia is necromancy, basically power over the dead spirits. So we can read also aspects of this in the Raziel grimoires, and how there was books passed down from Adam, the family line, down to Enoch, and Enoch also got the magic to control these beings and passed it down to Solomon, and then the Solomonic grimoires are dedicated to his son Rehoboam, who is half Phoenician, and so they were doing all kinds of stuff with it according to the particular demon. Each has its own particular powers, but they
how much are you willing to delve into this? Because I know you have expressed that you have experience with Solomonic magic. Have you ever met any of these goetic spirits?
I haven't been working Solomonic magic myself because I'm a pagan.
Sorry.
But
right, of course.
I've studied it for years and have gotten ritual ideas about how to structure a ritual or learn certain methods about scrying and stuff, and just looking at it all because it is drawing off the Greek magical papyri, and the Raziel grimoires also draw off the Greek magical papyri. Hygromantia in particular does. But you can also, not all of it is so evil, especially the Raziel grimoires. So what they explain is that those demons also cause sickness. And so there was also a book of Noah given to Noah on which herbs and plants can exorcise the demons that cause sickness. And there's a great Arabic grimoire, Solomonic grimoire, called the Book of Deadly Names, and it doesn't exactly call itself the Book of Noah, but it seems to be the closest example of this, and it involves clearly entheogens in the use of exorcisms, and you have again opium, you have nightshades, mandrake. It actually involves Syrian rue as well. Like each demon has its own particular cures. And one amazing thing I just realized, like I was rereading these to brush up for this interview, and acacia is one of the herbs in this. And it mentioned there's a great little index that lists all the herbs and their uses, and there's some lore about them in the Islamic tradition. And acacia sap is gum arabic, and this is one of the most common binding agents in incense mixes there is. And it also explains that it was just used as a binding agent for herbal remedies in general. One of the more common binding agents. So it seems like it is only a matter of time. Like it doesn't say anything explicitly about this, but we know that they're using Syrian rue. We know that they're using acacia as a binding agent. It seems like it was only a matter of time before somebody combined these and ingested it orally and had an ayahuasca analog.
Yeah.
It's the
Yep,
probability
yep.
is very high. I can't give you a recipe of it, but that's
Mm.
very high probability in that light.
Now, another thing I wanted to ask you that Dion has
Certainly
pointed out
using
a lot was
Syrian brew and
was
other things.
do you ever see anything in these Solomonic magic where people are cutting themselves, and then introducing drugs via the bloodstream, like
No,
medicated wraps? No?
no, they're using the incenses. They're using ointments, maybe, but or they're just eating it. That's not so much the medicated route. I've never seen that.
And do you ever see any reference to alabastrons or taking anything rectally?
No, I mean, I would imagine like the Abrahamic religions would probably be very
I know. I
scared
have to
of that,
ask, right?
but there isn't. So now to get back into the lore of the Islamic demonology, they have their closest equivalent to the two leaders of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch are Azazel and Shemyaza. Okay, and but
I got questions for you later about Azazel.
okay, so the closest Muslim equivalents are Harut and Marut, and they're tied to Solomon. And there's a bunch of lore about them. They turn up in the Quran actually, and Allah sent them to teach people, to test people and teach magic if they're willing, but they gain damnation. And so this actually seems to be the origin of the, or well, not maybe not the only origin, but of a demon pact between somebody like selling your soul to gain magic powers. It's not that because in Islam the angels are actually they're bound by Allah to serve humanity, but you're not so you have these magical abilities, but you're maybe not supposed to use them. So Harut Marut are tempting people, and if you can learn magic from them, but then you're going to be damned. And so it looks like the Christians who learned Solomonic magic from the Muslims reinterpreted this as a more of a demon pact, where you have to like you do have to sign an agreement in the Islamic tradition, but it wasn't such a. But the demon still serves God, whereas in the Christian tradition, the Satan is rebellious and can oppose God, and the demons also oppose God. So they had to like try to explain this in a different way, and it became more like the Faustian bargain there. But Harut and Marut, their names can be traced to Zoroastrian equivalent of archangels called Amentia Spentas, Horvatat, and Amertat. So they're high archangels, and they're positive in Zoroastrianism. But it just, and we can read even references to Zoroastrianism in some of these texts, like the Mother of Books says that Azazel, another name for him is Ahriman. And
Wow, that's intense. Ahriman, really?
yeah, and so in the 8th book of Moses references Zoroaster, and then also in the one of these Islamic grimoires, it does also reference the ghosts of the Magians as well. So there's
Amazing.
these things do turn up, and the Persians were the Zoroastrians, and they're heavy influence on the Shiite Ismaili mystical traditions, and where the Solomonic magic comes in Islam. Okay, so it actually seems to me, in terms of carpets and not a tent, well, using the carpet as a tent probably comes from Iran, which is of course famous for its carpets, Persian carpets, and one region in particular, Sogdia, is right on the Silk Road, and highly cosmopolitan, syncretic blending of all kinds of things coming together.
Don't you have Manichaeism there in a big way, from what I remember?
Yeah, and it's so it's all blended together there. And the Mother of Books is actually in part seems to be trying to convert those people or counter philosophically give a rebuttal to them about the problem of evil and their notions of demons and like this is taking into account all these different theories of demons and angels and trying to explain it according to the Islamic way and cut out all the cognitive dissonance and just make it coherent. So that's what the Mother of Books is about. And so Iran is a very important center of this, and the Zoroastrian influence through Harut and Marut, but they are involved with Solomon, and there's like this stone under his throne, and of course the throne is on top of a carpet, so it's all that stone. In other symbolism, is probably a meteorite. Okay, so
so is it a black stone? Are we getting into like the black stone, the Syrian black stone of Elagabalus and all this? What do you think?
Well, there's multiple versions of this. So this is a part of the Euhemerus Solomonic explanations. Okay, so the angels are stars in heaven, and so what happens when the angels fall? Well, that's a falling star. And what's a falling star in the mind of an ancient person is a meteorite.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And so the meteorites had, and in the pagan traditions, they're animists, right? So the meteorites have a spirit, and it's a heavenly spirit, not an earthly spirit or a daemon.
Of course.
And
yeah, you always see that tektite, all of these meteorites always take on heavy significance. Like I know in the Indian traditions, tektite becomes the Sintamani stone, which is used for granting wishes and is associated with the Nagas. So, yeah.
Yeah, so meteorites were sacred to all kinds of cultures, and the Abrahamic traditions demonized this because people were calling up the spirit of the meteorite, and like at the temple of Ephesus of Artemis, it mentions in the book of Acts, yeah, it has a meteorite in it, and so they actually built they made the statue of Artemis with a meteorite in it, and they would worship the statue with the meteorite in it.
I didn't even know that. That's wild. Because we do know that the Kaaba has a piece of tektite meteorite in it, and that there were several other Kaabas in the area that got destroyed that also had meteorites.
Yeah, well, that predates Islam, and the Venus goddess was worshipped as a meteorite and there was actually 3 sisters, and they each had their own meteorite. And so it's all over the place, and that's tied into the Euhemerist explanation of the pagan religions and the fallen angels teaching the religions to humanity. And so once you understand the symbolic keys, then these texts they are referencing each other, even if they are contradicting and arguing against each other, right? So they're rebutting each other and they're arguing with each other.
So based upon your understanding of all of this tradition, this Solomonic necromancy, as you're describing it, was Jesus, do you think, if he existed, a Solomonic necromancer?
Yes. Yeah, that seems very clear that he has power over the demons, and he's an exorcist, and he's supposed to be in the same family of Solomon. And even today, there are Christians who think of Solomon as prefiguring Jesus in some way or another. And the Gnostics also talk about some blasphemous groups that they hated or thought were stupid, who thought that it says Solomon sent a demon to go find a woman and impregnate her, and that's how Jesus was born. So you can and they thought that was stupid. The Gnostics thought that was stupid, but there was groups in that time who believed that. And so there's all kinds of these traditions about Solomon turning up throughout time, or like I said, in the Zoroastrianism, you see whether or not that was Solomon.
Or Suleiman, as you said.
Yeah. When Christians or whoever reads that, they're going to think it's Solomon, and they're going to try and interpret it that way. But it seems pretty clear that they were drawing on Zoroastrianism, even if they won't admit it, that's the three magi, followed the star or comet to the nativity. And so
And what do the
Jesus
three
himself,
magi bring? They bring frankincense and myrrh, right?
and Jesus himself is a stumbling block, or the rejected, the stone that the builders rejected, and he is associated with the cornerstone and all the stone imagery as well. So it's almost as if
Right.
he was a meteorite. And actually,
True.
we can,
They do follow the star to find him, and he is kind of this Luciferian figure. Wow.
yeah, actually, the Hermetic texts can actually shed light on this, because in Stobias, it explains that comets are an omen of a powerful soul incarnating, either often negative, actually, but sometimes positive, and they're called prophet stars, or whatever. And also in Stobias, we get the text Cor Cosmu, and that argues that all of humanity and all of life is created through a kind of panspermia, metaphysical panspermia, and we're all share the same world soul, but we are the fallen angels. All humans are and we're trying to reascend to the heavens. Okay, so
Right.
the Christians and Jews demonized the Hermeticists, at least in the Roman era, and so they plagiarized a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's where you get that every man and every woman is a star kind of idea, this above and a below symbolism with the stars. Yeah, no, that's powerful stuff.
So they say, yeah, we're the fallen angels and we're trapped in the material realm. We have to reascend. And so it's very Gnostic in that way, but it's way more monist, and there's no archons or anything in that. So again, we see this intertextuality, and they're referencing each other or even demonizing each other, but they're not necessarily saying who they're demonizing. It's just assumed they know that the
Right.
reader knows. So that brings us back to the 8th book of Moses, which seems to be plagiarized from Hermetic sources or pagan sources, Orphic sources, and stuff. So they're all learning from each other, even if they hate each other. And so.
But okay, so you were talking, what's the key difference though? Like when you're saying that, or what are the differences really? Because we have the Greek magical papyri tradition, and then we have this Solomonic necromantic tradition. What are the differences, right? Like why do you feel like the Solomonic tradition is so offensive?
Well, that's much more orthodox, and it was actually used by Catholic priests, and it was part of the church. I mean, they weren't, it was illegal at some times, but it was mostly priests who were using it. So they, as you
That's
can
why it
read
survives, I guess, so clearly, right?
from Saint Augustine, the Hermeticists accused the Christians of taking over the temples and setting up their martyrs and saints inside, and getting people to worship the saints and martyrs instead of the pagan gods. So they didn't like that. The pagans didn't like that. And the Christians did literally do this later on, take over the pagan holy sites and set up martyrs and saints. And the saints would impersonate the gods, take on their names very clearly and their stories. And so that's part of this euhemerist propaganda. And so the Hermeticists were pagan, and they didn't like that. So they were getting plagiarized and demonized. And so, as St. Augustine explains, Asclepius, the Perfect Sermon, is a Hermetic text, which is actually a rebuttal against the Abrahamic religions. So that kind of will take us off onto a tangent that we should probably get back to the magic carpets, but but to get back to one of the questions about sodomy and stuff that Dion brought up there is a spell in one of these grimoires. I think it's the book of Harut and Marut. Okay, there's a whole grimoire dedicated to them. And most of these are put out by Ishtar Publishing and this guy Nineveh Shadrach, so you can find them. But there is a spell to send a demon to go sodomize somebody.
Oh, wow.
So you can go, like, I suppose it's more like an incubus, and it happens in their dream. But so there's a few things there, and in the Solomonic traditions, they are, and the PGM, they're sometimes do use a boy for scrying. And it does specify it has to be an uncorrupted boy, has to be a virgin boy. So that brings up some red flags to me. It's like, well, how many boys do you have access to, and why do you have to? Why are some of them not virgins? And so,
Jeez.
and they have to. So the texts assume that you're raping boys, and that you should find one that hasn't been raped yet to be the scryer. And so that carries on to into the Christian Solomonic texts more so than the Islamic. There's a few references to boy scryers in the Islamic text, but it's not as common. And so there's some weird stuff going on there, and these are rapist demons again, so you have to keep that in mind. And in the Testament of Solomon, actually, it starts out with this demon incubus or succubus who is draining the son of the master workman. It doesn't name the master workman, but we know that must be Hiram Abiff from the Freemason legends, who is different from Hiram, king of Tyre, but he is a Phoenician. They're both Phoenicians, and so Solomon helps free the boy from the demon, and then that's how he first learns about the demons and starts calling them up to control them with the help of Uriel, the angel who also teaches Enoch the magic to control the Watchers. Now, what's really interesting and ignored or not talked about is that in the Testament of Solomon, Uriel actually is the father of one of these demons. So he is himself one of these fallen angels. He must be, if he had offspring, he must be a watcher. I don't know any other explanation for that. And
That's
so
wild.
So there's a lot of gray zone there. And so Enoch is actually asking God to forgive the Watchers and stuff, and he becomes Metatron, the angel himself, and he gains power over 72 angels who rule over the 72 demons. Though there's various numbers and groups of, according to the particular psalm, like that's not in the Testament of Solomon, but in the Book of Deadly Names, which is like the Book of Noah, the Islamic text with the entheogens, there are 72 demons in that. They're different from the Lesser Keys 72 demons, but the Testament of Solomon warns, if you're reading a grimoire that doesn't teach you to call up the angels first to rule over the chthonic demons, then you're getting fooled. You're going to be you're going to be damned. The demons are going to get the best of you anyway. So that's actually most of the later Christian magic doesn't have that until Dr. Thomas
But
Rudd.
what is with this 72 though? Because you see this number come up a lot with these 72 spirits, these 72 principalities, the unit that the world is divided into, and isn't Yahweh a leader of Israel? That's one of the principalities. What's going on there?
Right. So in Genesis, Noah has 72 grandsons, and they found the 72 nations. So there's 72 principalities or angels, and then, but this refers to 5 degrees of the zodiac, because the angels and demons are star angels, right? So you divide the zodiac into 5-degree sections. There's 72 of them. Okay, and so, or else there might be a division of 36, and then a day and night. So there's 2 for each 36 division, which is also 72. So there's different views on this, but it's astrological and mathematical is the reason for this. And it ties into the gematria of texts too.
It just makes me think of the Shaivite tradition because they get right into the numbers like 108 and into 36 as well, you know? So
right, yeah, 108 is 3 times 36.
exactly.
And then 216 is another important number in the Kabbalah, but that's twice 108 or 3 times 72. So anyway, that's another topic. But so the astrology is underlying all of this. You need to know the symbolism. You need to call up the demons in the right hour and the right day according to the planetary rulers or the zodiacal rulers, and that gives you the right incense and words and things to use. So if you want to go to that heaven, you have to do it at the right time and call up the right entities and stuff, or you're going to meet the entities there. So you want to know this beforehand before you get there. So all of this symbolism informs it various texts, and so there's all kinds of variations on the specific details, but the methodology of using the fumigation and entheogens is pretty clear. It's not always explicit, but you can, once you know what to look for, it's obviously there. In the book of Treasure Spirits, it says straight up, we've given you these instructions. I'm paraphrasing, and if you don't know, but I quoted in the book, if you don't know where to go from here or what to do, then that's on you, because they assume that oral instructions are going along with this. So the secrets of the entheogens are the deeper secrets that they're not going to talk about so openly usually, but there are a few texts that more or less you get bits and pieces there, and then you reread an old text and it makes sense in the new context. So the veritable key of Solomon teaches you to fumigate, and it says it very explicitly, but it doesn't give you an incense. Yet in other grimoires like Liber Juratus, or we can read from Cornelius Agrippa, very explicit recipes for incense. They're using the nightshades. They're using other entheogens in the Picatrix. Oh, I can't hear you, Snappy. You're muted.
And I was just going to say, and we know from other traditions that these nightshades are being used for this remote viewing in this astral projection. So what you're claiming is not that radical.
No, and one of these Raziel grimoires is called Liber Salomonis. So there's crossover between Solomonic magic and the Raziel grimoires, and it says explicitly to use cannabis for scrying. And also in the Picatrix, you use cannabis for necromancy and stuff. So
right.
They are reading each other, even if these are distinct traditions of grimoires. There were magicians who were mixing it all together and reading it according to and then making their own intertextual references and then relaying that to each other, because there is almost a scientific specifically in the Picatrix, there is this experimentalist attitude to this, and finding the best methods to use the entheogens, to work with the spirits, to learn from the spirits who are also teaching you how to do the rituals, or find the ideal imagery or symbolism to use.
Yeah, there seems to be this thing within the Picatrix tradition, like when you're looking at all of the planets, each of the planets, right? It's you have all there's spirits that you're trying to draw down, and they have all these associations with them. And then when you're making your amulets, you're kind of bringing all of this to bear. And then when you're supposed to be invoking them, you have to get into that headspace of these different deities, right? And they perform different actions and such, and they correspond to different functions, right?
Yeah. I mean,
like Saturn is the logical one, wisdom, and I know Mercury is like for communication and such.
Yeah, so the astrology provides the categories, and for what your intention might be, you'll find the planet or the zodiac sign that matches that, and then you'll use all of the associated symbolism with that planet, and then do the right day, like, because all of the 7 days of the week correspond to a planet, and you can see that even in, like, the names of the days, especially in the French, words for the days, like mercredi is Wednesday, is Mercury, or in English, Woden's Day is Wednesday. We get more Norse influence in the English, but in the French, the more Greek or Latin names are found. So, so all of this is, if you don't know astrology, you're gonna miss so much of the symbolism or what they're talking about, and
That's
so
because, right, like this astrology forms sort of a symbolic lingua franca for all of these people, right?
that's right, and the Kabbalah is that lingua franca in terms of how they relate it to Orthodox texts and stuff. So it's
Right.
provides the hermeneutics to interpret the text in light of the occult traditions and astrology in particular, and the numbers and stuff. So all of the Hebrew alphabet has astrological associations. Each letter has an astrological association, and same with the Greeks too. And so you can incorporate that into it, and you can design mantras or prayers accordingly too, using that. But there's just so many examples of, so in this, there's plenty of explicit use of entheogens in the grimoires, though, from Cornelius Agrippa to Liber Juratus to these Raziel texts. And so
So
even when you don't,
when we're
when you read
looking at these entheogens, though, okay, so we have these carpets which are clearly showing all of these dyes. Okay, so we know that they're doing that. You've mentioned that they're doing the marijuana. We have the various scopolamine type drugs that you were suggesting. Is there anything, like you said, there was also acacia? Like, are there any other DMT analogs? Do we see any references to like the magical fish that Dion had been talking about in previous episodes? Or yeah, what other drugs are they using?
no magic fish, but they're opium. You got the Syrian
Right,
rue.
of course,
You
opium.
got cannabis. I said. I mean, there's a lot of them are hard.
Are they creating DMT besides through the acacia and the Syrian rue? Do you think? Is there any other DMT things going on there, or would that be
I,
more of a stretch?
I haven't found any recipes that really suggest ayahuasca analog. What I said,
Mhm.
but as I was explaining, I mean, acacia was a common binder for herbal compounds. So I don't know of any recipes that combine Syrian rue and acacia, but it seems like it must have happened at some point, and they just kept it secret. That would have been one of their top secrets that they would have said, written it down openly. There's all
Right.
kinds of acacia symbolism in various places, uh, but it's more in Freemasonry and pagan sources usually. So
Okay.
it doesn't come up but it does come up in that Book of Deadly Names. Acacia is in there as and it's used to exorcise a demon to heal somebody. So I mean, they are using it as herbal medicine too, right? So it's not just, and this is kind of happening at the same time as the exorcism. The herbal medicine is being used to exorcise the demon. So it's working on multiple levels there. And it might be shamanist. Maybe the magician does get high and do it shamanistically, but it's you have to be able to read between the lines. So, you know, you in some ways, but we do know from in various texts they are explicitly using psychoactive incense. There's no doubt about that, and they are using it to fumigate, and so it's just a matter of connecting the dots, really. So
Right. And do you think they're also doing like are they turning these tents that they're making with these carpets, are they turning them into like sweat lodges as well, do you think? Or
yeah, well, I mean, they don't talk about the sweating, but they're hotboxing in there, and it's in
the
probably
desert.
in the desert, so it probably turns in that way. They are sometimes using ointments, as we can. But a lot of that's a good example of that is actually in a weird English grimoire. I don't remember the exact Sloan number, but it's published as the Book of Oberon, because a lot of these treasure magic, as I said, is involving fairies and stuff. And so Oberon is a character from Shakespeare's Midsummer's Night Dream, which actually involves pharmakia, sorcery in itself there, love potion.
Wow.
And so Oberon and Titania or Fairy Queen do come up in some of these, and they help to find things. And in the Book of Oberon, we get a reference to a fairy throne. Nobody's quite sure what that means, but it involves 3 sticks. And it could be I suspect they might be making a tent with it, or at least some kind of but it's very mysterious. But anyway, in that same ritual, you make an ointment from mandrake, and then you apply it to your eyes, and you can see the spirits after that.
Oh wow.
So it's very clear, and this Book of Oberon is actually one of my favorites. But they have all kinds of stuff in there, and they actually, as a little interesting side note, they actually reference John the Baptist and his head, and they pray to his head there. And they also reference Francis Bacon, which kind of adds credence to the idea that Shakespeare was working with Bacon. But who knows? That's just some circumstantial evidence there.
We get into serious speculation, but could be. It's interesting to think. But I'm just okay. So we're coming up around. Go ahead, sir.
Oberon was a pre-existing entity that Shakespeare was drawing on. He didn't invent it.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I mean, whatever's going on with Shakespeare, there's some clear esoteric knowledge there, right? Yeah. Regardless of what the truth is. But okay, so we're now coming on to like an hour and a half mark. So I want to start kind of winding us down here. What is your main takeaway from studying this magic carpet tradition? Like, if you were to try and summarize what these people are doing and what drugs they're using, what would you say, Wretch?
I would say the nightshades are the most important there. It's clearly part of an initiation ritual. In the alchemical tradition, we can see aspects of this, in particular and sensory deprivation is a huge part of this. After the initiation, they work it in there to get the sensory deprivation effects for the hotbox effects. And but we can see in alchemical artwork, actually, they're using these tents for scrying, and they depict it in the artwork, or else they have death and resurrection initiation rituals in a coffin, or the alchemical furnace seems to be such a sensory deprivation tank. So I have a picture in there, and you stick your head in the furnace, and then you see the visions in there.
Oh wow.
And you apply the ointment like a baptism of fire, and then you stick your head in the furnace, right? So you get the symbolism of fire there. And there's all these different versions of this, but they also just show a canopied tent in the artwork explicitly with the crystal ball in there or whatever. So it has a variety of purposes, but they're doing their evocations inside the tent a lot of the time, and they're scrying. So there's all kinds of things they might use with that, but nightshades, opium, and cannabis are the most likely, I would say, and they do come up explicitly in various texts that I have referenced. It's all collected in this anthology of primary text. I have some commentary there, but I knew that most people wouldn't believe me if I just said it, so I I just collected the data, and people can make up their own minds about it. And
honestly, everyone needs to go and check out this book here. It's so well done, and there's so much sources going on. You know, Wretch really goes through all of these various traditions. Like right here, he has got an example from the PGM. You know, we have some examples here taken from Arabic sources, from Islamic sources. Yeah. It's really quite an incredible work. Like this is a full-on book length, 216 pages, you know?
and lots of recipes of entheogen incense taken from primary sources. And I got the alchemical artwork there as well. If you want to go to page 179, we can show people that.
Sure.
And I got references from the Picket Tricks, which has plenty of recipes which influenced Christian occultism.
So yeah, here we have that picture you were describing with the guy putting his head into the furnace.
And you see on the left, they're applying the ointment to his eyes on the left there. So
oh yes, that's amazing.
It's all very clearly said, and then people going into coffins and
heating them up. Ammon has referenced this, the baking of people, right?
So you have the hermaphrodite there, yeah. And if you keep scrolling down, there's a bit more. So you get this twin symbolism or hermaphrodite. There's the dragon. This one shows, so he's got the tent with the names of the heavens on there, or, well, I'm not sure what the Latin is actually in that case, but definitely you write the names on the tent itself. And if you keep scrolling down, there's another example. So you see that the incense burners inside the tent, it looks like it's opened up just so you can see inside the tent, right? But they're clearly burning the incense inside. And so there's all kinds of, that's the end of the art for now, but or the first title page there has a different kind of sauna steam. That's more like the steam bath sauna there on the first title.
Okay, I'll go grab that then once again. So
just like page 1.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So that's taken from an alchemical woodcut there, and that's steam coming up there. And so
that's as explicit as it gets. Like, this is irrefutable.
Right. And we see in also the Persian traditions, they were hotboxing palanquins. And you see that the palanquin is another version of this Merkaba, flying Merkaba symbolism that we can see in the same Shahnameh. This is the Persian History of Kings. Jamshid, that Nimrod-like figure who teams up with Suleiman, he actually flies through the heavens in a palanquin. And I collected those sources on flying thrones in my volume 1 on Pagan and Gnostic antecedents. So you'll find the links to both of those in the description.
Yeah.
And so it's all related there. And also in the Alexander Romance, that's ripping off these same Persian traditions of a palanquin tied to 4 eagles, and they would fly through the heavens that way. Well, this is symbolic here. They didn't actually do that, but
there was a picture I had of that, right? With the eagles.
Yeah. So that's Jamshid there. Yeah. And he makes war on heaven that way as Nimrod, like a Nimrod type character. So, and that has Scythian roots as well in an obscure way, where they would shoot their arrows into heaven and they fell back bloodied. So they thought they had wounded God. I think it's probably symbolic of meteorites in a way, but and a comet. But it's also, there's this multiple layers because the entheogens are tied to the heavens themselves, and the plants take heavenly influence from the dew, as we can read in the PGM harvest ritual and other sources, and also just the timing when you harvest the entheogens according to astrological principles and things. So the sacred plants have heavenly connections in their own right.
Always, they're always usually associated with the moonrise and usually the dew. Right, there's something about the moonlight and the dew. Like I know with the soma in the Indian tradition, that the word soma actually refers to the dew that's growing on the plant itself.
Yeah.
So
So
it gets wild.
yeah. So there's so much more in these anthologies I've collected that we haven't even gone into, but I think you can at least see how they're more connected to they inform each other, and there's a lot there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Is there anything you wanted to ask, Dion? I know you wanted to ask about some demon or something there earlier.
Oh, no, you got into it. There was so much today that Wretch unpacked. I think we're going to have another episode with Wretch to talk about the robes.
Yeah, definitely.
The robes, the palanquin, or the other thrones. There is the physical throne that you sit on and has names written on it. There's some examples in the PGM, and it holds your body.
We lost you there, Rich. Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Oh, so in the volume 1 compilation, we can go into the actual physical ritual thrones that people sit in to hold their bodies to protect it while they're astral projecting. And it also depicts the cosmology. There's some examples from the PGM. There's flying palanquins. There's so much there. And it's the key to understanding the symbolism. There's multiple layers to the symbolism: astrological, entheogenic, ritual, cosmological, or just in terms of politics. But it's all, the allegories have many layers there, and they inform each other. And
right.
It works in multiple texts, multiple religions, even. So.
Well, this is the thing I've noticed with the magical traditions is they're underground and cross-cultural, right? There's so much interplay, like there's always this thing when people are looking at Renaissance magic, they're like, is it Christian? Is it Jewish? Is it pagan? It's probably all three.
Yeah. And they do, while they plagiarized Hermes, they also quote him openly in some of the, like Liber Salomonis, it quotes Hermes at length. And so, and some of the Arabic grimoires, they also refer to Metatron. I was going to say that. Yeah. And Metatron is Enoch, who is their version of Hermes, or Idris is his name in Islam. And he's associated with Hermes again. So
yeah, the voice of God, the messenger of God, right? The intermediary force there that speaks to you.
So sometimes they demonize it, but they're also plagiarizing it. So
it's ridiculous.
So at the same time, as a pagan, I don't want to practice the Abrahamic traditions, but we can reverse engineer it to understand the pagan traditions better and the pagan ritualism better.
That's what I think I find so interesting about your approach. It's so brilliant, because when I first heard you were digging into Solomonic magic, I was like, I don't know. But you're not really looking for it for that tradition that, for that Abrahamic tradition. You're looking for the roots, which I'm all about.
Yeah, and if you want to understand the Enoch mythos and its influence, you have to understand the Solomonic magic and Metatron and how he leads the angels which control the demons. So
yeah. This has been a fantastic talk. I guess we accidentally lost Dion there. He probably ran out of battery. But so yeah, thank you so much for this, Wretch. We're just going to wind down here. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we call it?
I'm sure I'll think of it after we say goodbye, but there's a lot in those books that we haven't really gone into. The fairy magic of Paracelsus, or pseudo Paracelsus, in the Orthodoxies of Magic. It is a great explanation of the psychological, psychosomatic, shamanistic healing, working with the fairies, but also to find treasure and how when you start to see the fairies or the spirits, that's when you start digging for gold, for philosophic gold.
Yeah,
But
amazing.
but
We're
you might
definitely
also
going to
be
have you back on, Wretch. We got to do a deep dive into robes. I know we also want to have you on for a personal interview where we're going to talk more about your experience as a magician and just an overview of your writing in general. But for next week, Dion and I are going to be back, and we're going to be doing an episode on the hidden traditions of the occult of the Catholic Church. Mainly this idea of spermatophagy or I can never remember what the word is, but it's this idea of eating semen as the sacrificial rite, as the ceremonial rite that's been hidden within the Catholic Church, and that the semen is the actual communion. It represents the blood and the body of Christ.
right. That's a
So
great topic.
we're gonna be getting pretty tense next week. But yeah. So, any last words there, Rich?
That's all for now, I think. Well, I look forward to coming back on in a future date to talk about more of this.
So it's been so great having you, and make sure everyone you go into the description, and you can get for free in the description. There's 2 links there. One to Wretch's book on magic carpets, which we have been discussing today, as well as his volume 1 on the pagan and Gnostic antecedents to Kabbalah and Merkaba traditions. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. I'm Snappy, and sorry Dion fell off the call, but yeah, we'll be back next week, and we're Occult Explorers. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.